Animals All the Time, Wildlife Conservation, the Lens of Law and Humanities. I'm Shelly Fiesmeyer, I'm the CASPA Program Director, and I want to introduce our speakers today. We have Karen Bradshaw and Ron Broglio. They're two professors at Arizona State University. Karen is a professor of law and the Mary Seigler Fellow at Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, where she teaches environmental and natural resource law, and she also runs the Radically Reimagining Initiative, which holds events that use food, art, music, speeches, and virtual reality experiences to break through silos and displace anthropocentrism in environmental discourse. And Ron Broglio is a professor and the director of the Institute for Humanities Research. He writes books and essays on non-human phenomenology and animal studies, and he has curated contemporary environmental art exhibits. He also founded the Desert Humanities Initiative, which supports work that analyzes, critiques, and transforms our relationship to deserts, and it provides opportunities to immerse in urban and rural desert sites to engage in the history, ecology, and possible futures of those areas. And I want to tell you a little bit about what's going to happen. So Ron and Karen are going to speak individually, and then they will actually speak to each other and start a dialogue, and then we're going to open it up for everyone else to join that dialogue. And with that, please take it away.
Yeah, so in the coin toss, I ended up going first. I'm going to read a little bit from Animal Revolution, which is a series of incidents that the animals are out there jamming the gears of our social machinery. The idea is, I started this in about 2005 as a series of blog posts. You know, you always see these one-offs of different animal incidents. And after a while, you begin to draw some lessons from them. You think, well, what can we learn about sharing the earth with a non-human world, right? A larger than human world. So I'll read a little bit about some of these incidents, and then kind of go from there. So this is from a chapter called The Exploit. In January 2006, one of the largest naval vessels in history, the USS Nimitz-class supercarrier, the USS Ronald Reagan, cuts a formidable path across the ocean. Gunmetal gray for the length of 3 football fields, rising some 20 stories above the water and weighing in at 100,000 tons. It is a military fortress at sea. Bearing 70 planes and a well-trained crew of 5,000, the ship sets off from San Diego on its maiden deployment. The mission support the U.S. forces in Iraq. The Reagan makes it to Brisbane, Australia, where it docks to resupply and allow the crew some time on land. While at port, the ship is held hostage to an unforeseen, spineless foe. Dun dun dun! Floating idly along the coastline, translucent blue membranes absorb the warmth of shallow waters and sunny days. In heartbeat-like rhythms, they pulse, taking in water and pushing it out to propel just a bit further along the ocean current. These few blubber jellyfish going with the waves happen upon a cross-current, pushing them further inland and bringing with them other jellies. Soon a bloom of jellyfish is moving in undulating waves towards Brisbane's military port. It is a slow yet persistent drive. Then, one after another, after tens of thousands, protein membranes push up against a metal floating fortress where they are decidedly and insistently stopped. While bobbing against the ship's steel plates, the jellies encounter another current, one that draws vast amounts of water towards the vessel's engines, where 2 Westinghouse nuclear reactors are ever thirsty for the sea to cool their core. The unwitting animals have gained entry into the vital center of the warship. It's like the scene from the 1977 Star Wars film, where rebels against the Empire discover an exhaust port that leads to the destruction of the Death Star. 1, 2, 10, Hundreds, then thousands of jellyfish float inside vast tubes until nowhere else to go. They push and crowd and crush each other as tentacles and membranes and goo fill grates and pipes. Pounds of jellyfish flesh accumulate until it's enough to prevent water from entering the engine's condensers. The problem begins to show up on the ship's monitors as the engine temperature rises. Without the seawater, the nuclear reactors will dangerously overheat. The situation becomes worrisome, then a concern, and then a threat. Officers call in the local fire department. They order systems shut down and switch vital ship organs to backup generators. So, an $8.5 billion, 800,000-ton paragon of U.S. military, with its frictionless command of the global seas, is stymied by a spineless, rudderless animal who goes with the flow straight into the bowels of the military vessel. These markers of animal resistance make us rethink our dominion over the globe. They have perceived, felt, moved through the world in ways we did not foresee, since their world is radically different from our own. And this difference is their opportunity to jam our cultural apparatus and mechanistic defenses. Jellyfish have been around far longer than humans. They have lived on Earth some 700 million years, making them contenders for one of the oldest multi-organ animals. And we help jellyfish thrive. As we troll the seas for fish, we are hauling out the predators and their competitors for food. Acidification of oceans due to global warming helps them too. Jellies have become a worrisome problem, and then a concern, and yes, now a threat that will not stop. So that's a small sort of section on something that, there's unforeseeable moments. And then from that I go into talk about nuclear bore and radioactive bore in eastern Germany. And they're radioactive because they eat tubers that have absorbed the radiation from Chernobyl. And so there's a disaster that we've forgotten, right? We've repressed. But the boar, they come into the cities, and no one wants to mess with them because they're wild boar and they're radioactive. So they become the return of the repressed. They are the keepers of our destruction and are the reminders, and they will continue to remind us for the half-life of uranium and the generation of boar that carry that with them. So while we think we can abandon much of our problems, those problems come back to haunt us in different ways. So that's sort of the lessons behind that. We were talking about little kids. I hadn't planned on reading this section, but we were talking about children earlier and how children see things differently. And all of these are segues into maybe some things Karen will talk about, which is ways of opening the world to non-human. So this is the opening. The second half of the book is human engagement with the non-human, and this is called The Crack. Good night, dear reader. Go home. Lock your cage well. One never knows what may happen. Sleep with one eye open. At any rate, sleep well. Pleasant dreams. And so ends part one of J.J. Granville's satire of Victorian manners in public and private life of animals. Let us consider what might happen in the lull towards sleep. After a day of manufactured wonder at Disney World, a child puts her head on the pillow, thinking of all the magic events as if they were still happening in the commercial utopia. Visiting a national park, this same child might draw towards sleep, imagining the roaring waterfall or some timid and unusual wildlife. At a later stage, about the time one begins to disbelieve in Santa, she may go to sleep realizing that Disney machines shut down and performers go home. But the national park waterfall does not turn off, and hasn't since well before she was born, and won't perhaps for long into the future. And the wildlife? They or their offspring are still there. They're not performing, and they're not paid. The animals live, out there beyond us. The girl may think, as children do, that adults do not know this. It is a secret she alone has discovered. Like a door to Narnia, it opens to a place that older humans do not understand because they're preoccupied with, jobs and houses and groceries and being adults. This secret is not simply that animals have worlds beyond our grasp. Rather, these worlds reflect back to us an image of ourselves that is unrecognizable. And I'll just repeat that. These worlds reflect back to us an image of ourselves that is unrecognizable. We are not the civilization we think we are, and we are not who we think ourselves to be. With wonder and a measure of cautious apprehension, the child stepping through the door to animals' worlds returns with a crack in her perception of humans. Adults, sitting leisurely on the sofa with feet propped up and with especially cozy socks designed for evening reclining, can feel rather comfortable and secure. Bricks and drywall provide insulation from the unpredictability of the great outdoors. Later in the evening, the seat becomes uncomfortable and the socks a bit too warm. The walls close in, as does the general feeling of unease. On yet another night, the eerie feeling returns, but with more focus this time, a claustrophobia. We have created cages for ourselves. Our range of motion becomes limited by the confines of our self-domestication. All the while, the child with a crack in her perception feels nature going on without us. Slipping from the domestic zoo, her mind goes feral. Maybe it starts with stuffed animals that swarm her bed, or begins with the phrase, "Reindeer are better than people," that has still echoed from repeating watching of Frozen. The crack appears and then untethers her from the commercial interpolation of the animal kingdom. Creatures lure the child. In such moments, her legs alight across the yard, earnestly moving her at very high speeds while repeating, "I'm a bee, I'm a bee, I'm a bee." The intensity of the child's insistent repetition and the effect of her gait makes the divide between humans and animals more of a mobile border. Then the border that was once a divide becomes an affinity that she can leap across. Sometime later, returning to her little girl self, she feels not herself as a daughter or a student. The way bees see her haunts and slightly unhinges her place in the civilized world. And so then I move from that section to national animals, and I look at the island of Guadalupe in the Caribbean islands that's adopted a raccoon that they thought was a unique species of raccoon. They were told this was a unique species for decades, and so it was like revered in the nation, even though it's like causing all kinds of raccoon destruction as they do. It was like, don't touch the raccoons, these are special to us. Only to find out much later, the scientists came and sort of looked at the skull of sort of the prototype of the species that was used to designate the species, and to realize it was just a teenage regular raccoon. It was not an especially small and unique raccoon. And so the scientists then tell them, we just have regular raccoons. And they're like, no, our raccoons are special. And so they have this kind of identification with the animal that it changes their relationship to it. And we can think again of for us here in the U.S., a relationship with eagles, right? And the role that DDT had played in the 60s and how it affected the bald eagle populations, and how we shifted our relationship to DDT and the environment by stopping that in order to save something we treasure. Right? So we do have these affinities with animals as we're adults. It's just finding those moments, finding those cracks. And so that's one of the things I'm particularly interested in about the book as well. And got just maybe a minute. Let's see. I should probably just.
Oh, I want to hear the next
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
I want to hear
Okay, all right. Just a very short one. When writing the book, I was told, okay, you did a good job. My writing coach said, you did a good job, but you can push a little further. What's your relationship to the revolution? I said, no, I'm an academic. I don't write about myself. It's like, you're going to write about yourself. So I had to write this piece, and it's called Bearing Witness. In the film Memento, because of a recent brain trauma, the protagonist cannot retain events from his long-term memory. That makes it difficult for him to track down the unknown person who killed his wife. He wakes up forgetting if he had a wife, and forgetting his intention to find the killer. His solution is to tattoo her death and the facts of the case on his body. His skin becomes the outward sign of things his inner mind cannot contain. The clues are inked into him. And while the movie had a lot of plot problems, I always liked the almost religious figuration of a tattoo as an outward sign of an inward symbol. But I never got a tattoo. I'm covered in hair, forearms, biceps, triceps, shoulders, backs, legs, and most definitely chest. Language and tattoos as tools for memory and meaning never cohere to the animality of my body. Hair as a friction to reading and writing prevented my self-inscription. Once on the beach, I took my t-shirt off, and one of my very hairless female friends gasped. She was not amused. I went to the Natural History Museum in New York with their infamous dioramas. Looking at a mock-up life-size model of a Neanderthal, I whispered, "He's got nothing on me." My outward sign is the hair of my animality. I awake every morning and dress, aware of my body in the world, one that has to be covered and fitted, hair tucked into my shirt, and the extra high button on the high shirt button to keep it down. Then I can be like other people at work, the ones whose bodies do not give offense by their animality. More recently, I've adopted the Sasquatch as a comrade. I don't know any Sasquatch yet, but I talk to them when alone. You understand, you outcast and haunted malformed being somewhere between beast and human. I'm convinced that the search for Bigfoot is so that one day, when captured, the hominid can profess to people what it is like to be the missing link. They have a non-human comportment and intelligence. They can communicate this animal nature to us. Or maybe Sasquatch is an external sign to us, but a collective cultural sign of our own animality and our desire to communicate with it. The aura of our bestial animal nature is there, elusive and blurry and on the horizon.
Thank you. Incredible. Thank you, Ron. That was really special. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shally, for hosting this. We are so honored to be the inaugural speakers, right, for the Casca Speakers Series. Thank you, Kim and Desert Botanical Garden, for having the wonderful wisdom to hire Shally into this role. And thank you to everyone who's here. I see a lot of friends, and I see a lot of friends I haven't met yet. So I'm excited to connect with people today and to understand the different experiences and backgrounds that you bring. I'm familiar with the work of CASA and the incredible opportunities that it brings to the Phoenix region and the Arizona region to connect people with their natural environments and to connect us with one another. So in the interest, right, of animals and radical reimagining, I don't really see events like this as me talking so much as us co-creating together. So as we're starting today, I would just ask that you do what I did for a moment while I was listening to Ron's words, which were incredible, but to tune in also to the physical space that we're in. So I just invite you to use your eyes to look at the incredible biodiversity
the plant life around us, the quail who are making themselves heard. Actually, that's not a quail, but I did hear quail during Ron's presentation. If you can smell, that's great. If you want to see the bird who's joining us for this co-creation, that's wonderful as well. We are now in this moment and always connecting with the more than human world, right? And even when we don't think about it, we ourselves are, of course, living beings among a living, rich planet of other living beings. And we don't always think of it in that way. But Shelly, when she invited me to chat with Ron today, said, can you talk about the ways that you're connecting different conceptions, new conceptions of animals and nature and the human relationship with nature with law? And law, I have to say, you show up to something that's maybe some lawyers or not all lawyers, and everyone just kind of checks out. And I think that's because the traditional model of a lawyer is antithetical to the values that brought many of us here today, right? But the thing that's happening, and I'm so excited that it's happening, is this revolution of the kind that Ron talks about in his book, where suddenly even the most hidebound economic and legal institutions in our society are beginning to understand what many of us have always known, which is that we are animals like any other species on Earth, and we live in constant physical relation to one another, but also to a much broader natural world. And we've tried, markets, government, law, institutions, for a long time, to act as if animals are the only thing that matters. The human animal is the only animal that matters. But we're reminded increasingly through things like climate change, biodiversity loss, raging wildfires, that living as if we are in these inescapable economic institutions that are just separate from the natural world doesn't work. We're constantly in the natural world. If you follow us on Twitter or on Instagram, there's a blog post going up today from a conference I attended this summer, and there were 30 legal minds. It was the Environmental Law Collective, some of the top leading scholars in the United States. And we were invited to this event to talk about these pressing problems, things like what do you do with unhoused populations and increasing temperatures? How do we think about solar geoengineering, modifying the natural environment? How do we wrap our brains around these legal problems? And what I did during the conference, I was sneaky. I watched what the lawyers did, what these leading brains did when they weren't actually being serious academics. And what I saw was them doing things like diving into the Columbia River Gorge at night and going for a swim. I saw them picking blackberries off of bushes and bringing them back to share with their colleagues. I saw them rocking my baby in their arms, parents who just found this natural animal motion of how to soothe a child that wasn't even their own. And what I observed is that even though there's a lot going on, and I'm not dismissing it, there's a lot going on in the world right now, there is also our innate sense of connection with one another, with our physical bodies, with our animal selves, and with our natural surroundings that we have allowed for far too long to be stripped from our institutions. We have these anthropocentric, these human-centered institutions where we pretend like humans are the only species that matter. That's law traditionally. But what I've seen happening, and what Ron and Shelly and Matt and Erica and Kim and Stacy and so many people gathered here are doing in their daily working lives, is seeking to reintegrate humanity into connection with the rest of the living world. Right? And so in my very brief comments today, before we get the chance to dive into our talking, I'm just going to talk about two things. One is radically redefining the human relationship with nature and one another. What does that mean? And the second is how lawyers play a role in this, which sounds really boring, but basically the punchline is we want lawyers to stop being the deal killers and the place that people go to have good ideas die, and instead have them be co-collaborators in broader institutions that integrate diverse inputs and ideas and rationales and education and experience. So to start sort of down this theme, before we address those 2 points, I want to share a brief little story, and Ron could not have chosen a more perfect reading about this little girl, because my story begins when I was 4 years old. So I'm very, very happy. My mother is here today, Bradshaw from Northern California. She rarely gets to come to my talks because she's almost always holding that little baby who's with me most of the time at work events, and she's been amazing in childcare and life and throughout this trajectory of trying to express these ideas of nature. But when I was 4, she did the best thing, which is tell me, go outside and play. And I did. And what happened when I was 4 years old is I formed a relationship. We were in a very rural place, Klamath, California, 700 people, the middle of the redwoods. There wasn't a grocery store in the town. The nearest grocery store was 30, 45 minutes away. We were in a trailer. We had a big grassy area, and there were quail in the yard. And I formed a relationship with the quail. And I would go outside every morning at 4 or 5 a.m. and talk to the quail. And I would literally talk to the quail. And over the period of years, until I started elementary school, I would talk to the quail every day. And no one told me the quail didn't have a language. And so I learned their language. And I would literally communicate with them. And that was something I sort of had to forget for a while, right? I went to elementary school, I went to high school, I went to an MBA program, I practiced real estate, I went to law school, I jumped all around the country. And it wasn't until years later, right, when I had this academic home at ASU, which is this remarkable institution that's doing something groundbreaking and revolutionary in education and legal education, inspired by this charter that says it's about who we include, it's not about who we exclude. That I had the freedom to reconnect that 4-year-old child who understood that quail could talk, who understood that I was one creature with connection with every other living thing. And when I increasingly connected to that, motherhood helped when I had my own child, and she reminded me, in the way that children do, that there was more outside of the human brain and human institutions. And I began to connect that into the very formal study of laws and cases and statutes and history, that I thought, I think this is wrong. I don't think this is consistent with what I understood from living in rural, impoverished, natural spaces that were rich in biodiversity. And so my work challenges sort of the existing conception as Earth and its resources as existing for human consumption. And many of you know, most of our environmental laws in the United States were enacted in the 1970s by a very small, not very diverse group of lawyers who wrote statutes that were designed mostly to control pollution. And that's kind of how we landed in this mess, right? Our existing laws do not address most of climate change. They definitely don't address issues like wildfire or forest management. They certainly don't get to biodiversity laws, right? We have little pockets here and there. The Endangered Species Act does some things. NEPA is important in certain ways. And Lord knows, they are doing amazing work on all fronts at many federal, state, and local agencies to address the problems with the laws we have. But if you're familiar with the legal landscape, what the laws do is create anthropocentrism, right? There's no interspecies equity. Only human needs matter in the legal framework, most of the time. There are some exceptions. But what I think is happening, and I'm so excited for it, is that there is a group of people in law and outside of law who are challenging that, right? There are these incredible books right now, The Hidden Life of Trees and Immense World, which tell us that animals and trees and plants and landscape and nature are much more alive and sentient than we typically, in mainstream contemporary Western society, give them cause for. And so that's a human relationship with nature, right? We're beginning to think there are new ways that we should relate to other living things. And let's be honest, I say new. These are not new. These are only new to the English common law, which dominates the contemporary American legal system. These are truths that have been understood by many people throughout time, space, and history, and still are today. But this very narrow, legal, anthropocentric view has dominated law and created myriad problems that we're struggling to unpack today. So that's the human relationship with nature, also the human relationship with one another, right? We're living in a time of deep polarization. And people are struggling to understand how to connect to one another to achieve solutions, right? To do things. And that's what I'm so excited about with Casca, right? For the past 5 years, I've researched. Shally, as my PhD student long ago, was doing research with me. We co-authored papers on how people can work together to overcome this deep polarization. And the solutions, which form a report used by ACUS, a federal government agency, says that groups exactly like Casca, which Kim formed to create this meta-agency or meta-stakeholder group, helping different groups doing different very important environmental work, learn from each other, connect with one another, collaborate with each other, co-create with one another. This work is how depolarization is happening in the United States. Okay, so human relationships with one another, human relationships with nature, but where does law fit in? Well, I said traditionally lawyers are the people that everyone else kind of groaned when they started talking. Because a group of scientists or artists or writers might have some idea about, let's do this to achieve an outcome. And lawyers traditionally would say, well, we can't do that because, right? People are smiling and laughing because they know that conversation. They've had it, and that's the reputation we've had. But those are not the lawyers that I am training in my classroom. Instead, what we have are collaborators and visionaries and people who are willing to take the tools of our trade and wield them in new and exciting ways. And the best part about being at ASU is that we have one of the most diverse student bodies in the nation. There are any number of metrics that we can point to say that we are doing really important work training the leaders not only of the state of Arizona, but also national leaders. People who may not have traditionally had access to justice and these tools and the legal systems that we are able to sort of couple with or partner with these sort of diverse individuals and groups that are using the tools that they have historically used for this very narrow set of issues and radically thinking about new ways that they can connect their lived experiences, their community insight into traditional legal systems and new ways of understanding the law. Does that make sense? So I, a little girl from rural Northern California, living in a trailer in the middle of the redwoods, is not who traditionally went to law school, right? That I was lucky. I had a mom who did not complete college herself, but made sure that her daughter was going to go to college and go to law school. And what she achieved by doing that is she helped society put into my hands the tools of the legal trade. Now, my professors might have thought, oh, what are you going to do with this? You'll probably keep doing what we've done. You'll keep doing environmental law the way it's always been done. But my answer is no. Thank you for these tools. I'm excited to work and collaborate with you, but I'm also the little girl who talked to quail when I was 4 years old. And so as a result, let's take some of that insight and put it into law. Let's wield these familiar tools in new and exciting ways. And the way that that works is I get to collaborate with amazing people, many of whom are here today, who I know and am so excited to work with in a variety of ways, and co-create new visions. Let's just make a new ecological future. I want your ideas and your ideas and your ideas on how we do this. And then the cool thing we can do is use these legal tools, understanding cases, reading statutes, enacting new laws, and build pathways between where we are today and where we collectively want to be. And that is incredibly exciting work. It allows us to take this connection to the more than human world that each of us can feel when we sit here and look at the plants or look at the animals and bring it into new ways of being where it's accepted and formalized and part of what shapes our law and culture in society. So I'm so excited for the conversation with Ron and so excited to talk with all of you about this.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Karen. Since you have the book here, wildlife as property owners, I thought you could talk a little bit about how that concept opens up possibilities both within law and within culture. It's sort of a crack within a system. Yeah.
So I think wildlife as property owners says we live in a capitalist society. We own property. And for decades, centuries, English common law has taught that only humans can own property, right? But my book says, actually, no. If we're going to have property and we're going to have ownership, let's open it up. Why can't animals own the property that they live on? Why can't they be co-participants in systems of economics and law and governance? So maybe if you don't mind, I'll read just one thing. Let's see. Humankind exists with all other living things. People drink the same water, breathe the same air, and share the same land as other animals. Yet property law reflects the general assumption that only people can own land. The effects of this presumption are disastrous for wildlife and humans alike. Anthropocentric property is a key driver of biodiversity loss, a silent killer species worldwide. The linchpin of conserving wildlife is identifying the effects of the legal fiction that only people can own property. If excluding animals from a legal right to own land is causing their destruction, extending the legal right to own property to salvation to wildlife may prove its salvation. So that's the idea.
Yeah, I think what's great about that is you write in a way that non-lawyers like myself can actually, read the book and understand some of the ideas behind it. It reminds me also that there's this movement, Elizabeth Colbert, who wrote The Sixth Extinction, and a few others have been writing about this, of the idea of providing rights or a humanness to like rivers and to other natural entities, sort of like we provide rights to corporations.
That's exactly right. So I mentioned I was from Klamath, California, and the Klamath River is the first river in the United States to have legal personhood. So rights of nature is literally happening in the river where I was born and where I spent a lot of time growing up. And I think that that's kind of not a surprise, right? I think that place breeds people. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that river and those quail influenced me in the way that I was. Now, I don't know. Let's talk about your book for a second. How does that intersect with the rights of nature? Because you're saying animals are kind of silently signaling to us, right?
Yeah, so the idea is that, as you were saying with law, that that's a hermeneutic circle. It's a language that's closed in on itself, that we have a language that is sort of within our own cultural sphere. So how can animals, tap on our window or knock on that door or, rumble beneath the floorboards? And so sometimes it comes in these violent moments or in these shocking moments or these sort of one-off incidents. But each of those one-off incidents, the proposition is each of those one-off incidents, when put together cumulatively, become signals from a non-human world, right? They can't speak our language, but through the language that we share in common, which is language of bodies on the earth, they can provide frictions and disruptions to ourselves and to worlds around us, whether it's, orcas in yachts or maybe it's sharks biting through underwater cables, etc. So that you can go through a whole list of different things. But they're recognizing that that's their world and they're exploring it as well, right? So finding that language for a shared earth, I think, is what we're both interested in.
I think that's right. And I think one of the things that's beautiful about you, Ron, is that you're able to see those messages, right? 100 people might witness the story of the jellyfish and not understand that there's a message in it. But I think you see that message.
Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. And it comes back to like the child and that sense of wonder, and why we enjoy being out in nature so much is, people say, oh, I'm going to go out in nature and kind of lose some of the problems of the day, or whatever it might be. And people come to the Desert Botanical Garden, which becomes this ambassador for a much larger world that's just out there. And so this is sort of like a little outpost to a bigger world of possibility. And it becomes an exemplar of what is possible. And recognizing that other worlds are possible is part of keeping that wonder going, right? So oftentimes we're stuck in those legal binds and political binds and other binds. And if we can keep the idea that no, other worlds are possible, and I've seen them instantiated in places like this garden, in places like national parks and state parks, then all of a sudden we begin to realize that there are other ways of being. And then that other ways of being is a shifting of what culture means, right? Culture is a way of being in the earth, passed down through generations, much like law is passed down through generations. And so then if we can say, yes, but, can we take our children to the botanical gardens? Can we take them to the parks? Can they begin to learn about this other way of being, other way of interacting? Then it becomes more natural, right? We saw this during COVID with more people going outside. And as complex as that was, the exciting thing were people discovering the outdoors again, right? Not always knowing what to do out there, but having to learn. And the sad thing is when they kind of just go back to like normal, but the exciting thing is the ones who have decided, oh, I want to keep trying this, right? Other worlds are possible, other ways of being. And you get that, of course, in law with kind of these breakthrough cases that say, no, there are other ways of taking our cultural tradition and propelling it propelling it further.
Well, I think that's generous to say that law moves the ball forward. I don't know to what extent law moves the ball forward or society, but I think one of the fun things for us, Ron, has been co-creating. And Ron, if you don't know, is the director of the Institute for Humanities at ASU, and his gift, he has many gifts. I mean, his running skills are a gift in and of themselves, but one of his gifts is creating community. And he connects people and helps people understand how they can co-create futures. So Ron did this really incredible thing. When the book came out, we hadn't met. And he reached out to me and he said, I would like you to be, at that time you were the director of the Desert Institute for the Humanities, the Desert Institute for Humanities Fellow, and I'll give you $10,000, which was incredibly generous, to host an event or a series of an event about your book. And I thought it was so incredibly nice. And also, I did not want to throw myself a book party. That just felt uncomfortable. So I said, let's do something better, Ron. I want to hang out with you. Let's have fun. Let's see what we can create. Let's riff on this. And so we created the Radically Reimagining event, which was an Earth Day event that sought to identify, recognize, and amplify people in Arizona who were doing really cool, new, innovative work, and to take their stories and bring them to one another and create sort of a performance art event where we had 5 different artists, broadly defined, sort of present to this group of 150 attendees who collectively were radically reimagining new sort of environmental possibilities. And the idea was like, let's just suspend all our divisions and what we think we know and the ways we usually relate to each other and create a non-hierarchical event where the caterer and the event planner are just as much co-participants as the dean of the, Jeffrey Cohen, dean of humanities, this incredible leader within the institution. Let's have everyone sort of co-create. Let's riff off of one another. Let's make new things. Lauren Strohacker, who is watching us on Zoom, if not right now, in the future, created this incredible art installation of predators that once existed in Phoenix and no longer did. And we created this opportunity where people can create new environmental futures. And we've done that since. There's a book project happening now. Shelly is one of our contributing writers. Stacy is another. Erica, we're trying to convince to be one of our artist contributors. So there's this incredible group of people and energy that Ron has brought together to co-create new possibilities. And that's kind of, I think, a really exciting thing. And that's what law needs. We need to co-create a vision, not have one discipline or one sort of school of thought create an idea and then say implement it, but to work together.
Right.
Right, to co-create.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think whenever we want to engage other people in the project of renewing a relationship with nature and animals and the environment, it's getting them to tell stories. Now, did you have some pets? Tell me about your childhood dog, or let's talk about that national park you went to, or have you been camping, or whatever it is. And getting people just to tell their stories can be a really powerful way because they invest in, and they're writing their own narratives. They're writing narratives about their identity and their identity in relationship to their families and communities, and that becomes a way of breaking through a lot of other barriers we would otherwise have.
Well, on that theme, shall we open it up to hear some stories and
Great, yeah.
open up the conversation? How do we see this going, Shelly?
Well, if anybody has questions or comments, do you want for hands raised or? Sure. Yeah, just raise your hands so we aren't talking over each other, and we'll start with you, sir.
You mentioned that their current environmental law is not really up to snuff as far as this discussion goes. Have you considered encouraging a law student at the school to write maybe a senior note for the law review, picking some aspect of environmental law that's screwed up and dealing with it?
So, great question. Just to repeat for the folks online, can law students write new ideas or new ways to innovate in environmental law? I have to say, so you're sitting next to the dean of the law school, Stacy Leeds, who is our incredible leader, and allows me to teach this really exciting class called Biodiversity Law. It's a seminar, and the idea is it's not just those traditional environmental laws, the 1970s statutes, this narrowly defined anthropocentric field. In biodiversity law, the students think about these new exciting possibilities. We work with some of the artists from the Radically Reimagining Initiative. We're doing a chat GPT, AI, contract drafting. I mean, it's just a very, very different, much less rigid, much less bounded set of ideas, but in the end, what they create is new legal pathways. So exactly this. And the writing project specifically, 2 years ago in biodiversity law, we co-authored, me and all of the students in the class. Shelly is one of the co-authors. She was not a student in the class, but she marshaled these very many different essays into a workable document that became a book chapter for critical animal studies by Palgrave Press. And we were the only sort of legal contributor in the book, but we reimagined leading legal cases from the perspective of the animals they evolved. Oh, thank you. And so in this class, every student writes something of publishable quality. They get at least a book chapter, but also there are law review articles forthcoming, etc., where they are thinking in very innovative ways about how to reshape law, but doing so under the supervision and structured framework where they're getting sort of a peer review from other students in the class and one another for ways to expand beyond these narrow set of laws to really create legal innovation. So I'm lucky to work at an institution that doesn't just say, just teach the cases from the 1970s and be done with it, but instead thinks about how can we do really interesting, radical new things to sort of move the ball forward in directions that are interesting, cross-cutting, bipartisan, and really can reframe the system.
It's interesting because one of the things you think about is who owns the future. And, for example, the stock market is planting flags in the future, right? It's literally making financial bets on where the future of investments and production and basically culture will go. And so while those flags are planted and things move in that particular direction, it's these kinds of interventions that really do say another world is possible, right? Instead of these flags over here, let's plant a flag over there. Let's plant another or a seed or a possibility that could grow otherwise. And yeah, it's an exciting moment.
It's really exciting. Yeah.
Laura?
So I have a question because unfortunately my generation is part of the generation that created this conundrum that we're in about how we interpret law and how we live on past cases. In our state, I did my thesis on state conservation and state trust lands. We have a thing called highest and best use for the sale of state trust lands. In my mind, as an environmental planner, highest and best use is not just for humans, but for animals. And in fact, that is the highest and best use because when the animal biodiversity are healthy, humans can be healthy. So in this state, though, that's not the case. Highest and best use is an anthropocentric view of selling for the highest value of land. So how do you begin to break that and change the case law? Because a lot of the conversation is based on case law. And every time you try to enter in a different conversation that tries to make that shift and plant that new seed and put a flag in the future, you have everybody revisiting the past. I'm also a NEPA planner, so we're driven by that also. And despite all the issues about climate change and we can't get that entered into NEPA right now in a meaningful way that we can begin to look at what are the costs of global warming and greenhouse gases as a cumulative effect. So how do we break that situation in a real practical way when there's a lot of people invested in keeping it the way it was?
That's a great question. So, state trust lands in Arizona, I think the cases you're referring to say that they can only be sold for cattle grazing or auctioned off for cattle grazing. Conservationists tried to buy out cattle grazing permits for conservation reasons, and courts said no.
It's highest and best use.
Yeah.
It's not even about cattle versus conservation. It's just that they claim highest and best use is a sale to somebody to develop, not for the sale of conservation. Even if we can compete on that price.
Yeah, so
it's not the highest and best use.
But the good news is, like, when you know how to wield the legal tools, you can come up with a different definition of highest and best use, and people do this. This is the cool thing about law, is that it's living. It's a system, and it's constantly subject to change. So, for example, in California, there are water rights highly contested, like the Delta River, and the Delta River Smelt now has a property right, where they have a recognized property interest in this very contested water. So just like many people or homeowners associations or cities might have a property right, so too does the Delta smelt. And so just as precedent can line up against conservation, so too can precedent begin to line up for conservation. And the way that legal innovation happens, I mean, there are several pathways that it can happen, but one is by bringing cases, right? So you mentioned NEPA and NEPA coordination. I'm sure you're familiar with the case Pels versus Montana, which was a case brought by the children of the state of Montana that said there's a constitutional right to a healthy environment. And oil and gas leases are not considering climate change effects, therefore are violative of this right. In order to issue state permits for oil and gas leases, the state should be engaging in climate change analysis and how that affects the state constitutional rights of children. And the court said, yes. And so then a reporter from the Arizona Republic called me and said, could this work in Arizona? And the answer is we don't have a state constitutional amendment yet to a healthy, clean environment. But that kind of innovation in one place may work in other states. And it's traceable to litigation out of Oregon 10 years ago. And so legal innovation can be slow sometimes, but if you look at the national picture, things are changing, and it's cases, right? I co-authored a brief for Happy the Elephant, which is held in the Bronx Zoo. Right, and Happy the Elephant, my daughter, who's 8 years old, said, Mom, you have to write this. And I said, baby, I'm busy. Like, this means you're going to have more time without Mom. I don't have time to take on this project. And she said, you have to. You have to write this case for this elephant that's in a very confined space, and their non-human rights project want to move it to an animal sanctuary. And we lost the case, and she was really disappointed. And I was like, legal progress isn't always linear. And now there's a city in California that says, no, sorry, we ban the captive nature, I don't know, keeping elephants in captive conditions where they don't live in the way that they do. And so it was really sad in the moment I told her we lost a case, but that case wasn't the end of the story. And this innovation, this gradual shifting away of we did this brief in New York, and suddenly in California there's a lot changing, and now New York State is considering something very similar. So I think it happens, right? I think the practical, pragmatic, on-the-ground innovation is possible. It just isn't always as fast as we'd want. I don't know, thoughts, Ron, innovation?
No, I was wondering about, I mean, this, and other people may know this as well, how the economic argument is used, that sometimes conservation allows for tourism as a sort of a financial good for humans, or and Tyler DeRoche, has been doing work at ASU on sort of the value of the so-called economic value of nature. And trying to make that argument, and so I'm wondering, like, if that kind of tourism stuff is a way in to say, like, if you ruin a lot of this, then the reason people want to come here begins to be lost. Again, it reflects back on us, of course. I mean, ideally, we shouldn't have to make those arguments, right? That nature is a good in itself, right?
I think what you're saying is really interesting, though, which is you're wielding the same economic tools that have pushed against nature to say, well, no, actually, there are recreational values or there are conservation values that should be afforded something. So if we're speaking in the language of economics or we're speaking in the language of law, we can make arguments in different ways, and I think that's an important point.
It would be more of a punitive approach, but, we have a lot of very clear laws about animal abuse in homes and neglect and how domesticated animals are treated. Is there a parallel that could follow for animals in nature? By not providing adequate habitat, that's actually a type of abuse. Or in some other way harming their.
Interesting. I love that. I say in the book, and I think it's true, like, if animals are starving, for example, because they don't have access to enough vegetation, or if land development is pushing animals out of their habitat and causing them to die, it's no different than abusing an animal in your household, because we know what we were doing. Maybe there was a point in history where people didn't understand that land development led to habitat destruction and caused species to become extinct and suffer sort of at an individual level, but that moment is past. We've known since the 1970s, there's congressional testimony for the Endangered Species Act that says land development is causing the death of many animal species. And so we're aware and we're culpable. And I love the idea of sort of building out that legal theory. I think compassionate conservation, right? Liz Baker does a little of this, where they talk about individual lives of animals and how even animals without a direct relationship with humans are worthy of that kind of consideration.
So like the burrowing owl being an example that happens around a lot of farmland and other areas, but then when that's developed, their tunnel, their burrows are disturbed. I also wonder about, I don't know the law around it real well, but there's the conservation of particular bird feathers, for example, the California condor, that the feathers are to be given to indigenous tribes, not sort of held individually. That becomes a model for an identification between particular groups and particular animals, and develops a kind of relatedness that I think is a great model for how can we find these that connectedness to not just nature in general, but very particular nature. As you were saying, that we're born from place, and place informs who we are. So this particular river or this particular species, how can I begin to identify with a particular set of relations and honor those, and then how can we as communities do that?
Absolutely. And individuals. I think pets is a really interesting one. A future book project I'm working on is called My Dog is My Baby, the American Multi-Species Family. And this is one of the arguments, right? Like, how does legal innovation, is your name Sandy? Sandy asked, how does legal innovation happen? And I think, in the property realm and pets, when I was writing the brief about Happy the Elephant, people said, in legal briefs where they were representing to the court, animals are property. Animals are no different than a TV or a stereo in your home. And the reason I'm writing this coming book and sort of the set of articles around it is when I was researching for Happy, I found out in New York State that's just not true. Dogs in New York State, if their humans are divorcing, are subject to an 8-hour custody hearing, right, with public resources and judges who decide who gets the dog. And no one does that for a toaster, right? And so even states like Alabama and Alaska now have statutes that said dogs are decided in pet custody cases by best interest standard, right? It's not property, it's not who paid for them or who buys their kibble, it's who the dog has a relationship with. And so there is this innovation happening, there's this change in which the way in which animals were situated historically in law is no longer true today, but people say it all the time. Newspapers, reporters say it. People say it in legal filings, pets are your property. I found it on probably 10 websites in states where it's absolutely not true as legal advice. And so the law is changing in this area, and I think that's a really exciting thing. We hear so much bad news, the law is changing here.
I keep thinking about kind of the whole financial side of things too. How the extractive industries have a tendency to still just run roughshod over us. I mean, whether it's oil or look at basically what I consider some of the rape and pillage of mining activities historically around Arizona. They get what they need and they just walk away. And how are we ever going to win some of those battles? I mean, you find some of the companies that are trying to be a little bit more environmentally sensitive, or at least say they are. So they try to kind of greenwash stuff a little bit, but it just seems like money always wins.
It's a huge problem, and it also comes down to what kinds of resources, right, and how we want to use them. What do we gain by getting off of oil and natural gas? That also means extraction of other minerals. So, what are the cost benefits, right? So all of a sudden it gets really, as you know, it gets complex very quickly. Right? So, but that again is it's what Donna Haraway, this kind of cultural philosopher, calls staying with the trouble, right? That there's no easy solutions. It's messy in there, but it's important to kind of stay with that and to ask the really complex questions and not be daunted by that. Say, oh, okay, well that's not a solution either. That's not something, because sometimes it is that idea the best can be enemy of the good, right? So how can we at least get to a good? And what would that mean culturally?
I had to say, it's depressing. right? It's depressing, but I do think there's an answer, right? We can't give up. That's the first thing. The moment I had my daughter, I remember I was sitting in a botanical garden in Hawaii, and I was had her on my chest. She was 3 months old, maybe 6, and there was a flower, and it was the last flower species of its kind in the world. And I thought, oh, like my career has now become a calling because there's a little person who won't have this flower to show her children. And it was so funny because it was just the moment it all hit for me. I was like, oh, like I have this education and these tools and this training, but then it connected with the purpose, which is there's another generation out there. It's not just me. It's not that I get to see this flower. I want the grandchildren I've never met to get to see this flower. We owe something to the future, and that's a moment that it just became a passion for me, right? The entire idea of redefining the relationship. And I think the answer is, my father's a forester, my partner's a farmer. Like, I think that there are people who are in all sorts of industries or positions or relationships with the environment who do really good work. And it's not possible to vilify the people in many cases, but I think the structures can be really problematic. I worry about corporate structures that have no relationship to the land. I worry about technology that has no relationship to the land. That's why I always start any conversation with, like, let's take a second to connect to the fact that we are people in a physical place in animal bodies in this physical environment. Because I think the minute we forget that, we have lost everything. But I think as long as people can be connected to their physical place, there's hope, right? And so I think my walking practice, where I walk through the Phoenix Mountain Preserve several days a week, is just as important as my writing practice or my yoga practice or anything else, because it's a physical relationship to place. And so whenever I feel hopeless, and I do, right? People often do, but giving up is not a choice, so what do? I think we connect to place, people to place, and institutions that divide that, whether it's globalization, like let's just put our pollution somewhere else and get cheaper labor and not think about the effects of our actions, or if it's corporate structure, let's take soulless structures that can't care about the physical place in the way that my grandfather or my father cared about the lands that they managed. I think you're in a world of hurt. And so I worry about those institutions, and I think the answer is connect people to place.
It's great. There's that saying, are we being good ancestors? Right? So keeping that in mind. So I'm going to nod to Erica Hansen, who works on art and issues of extraction, and kind of works a lot with rocks. I've never, she's the person who has made me care more about rocks than anyone else. And I think that art practice thing can provide affect. So if science deals with data, art provides affect. It becomes that other kind of portal for connection. And so that's also, I think, very, very valuable.
I keep Erica's rock sculptures in the center of my home, literally, on a coffee table in my living room to remind me of that, right? That rock. I keep bronze art, which is fantastic, and Erica's art, because it's not just going outside, it's thinking about other people. We're in a community of people. Everyone here today cares about nature or their human relationship with it. And I think that's the answer. I think it's communities of people, and people like Ron, people like Erica, like so many people here who care about those relationships. I don't know. That's the only thing I have. What do you think?
Yeah, but finding the way to make that happen is the struggle. I mean, I work in the Phoenix Mountain Preserve, and I still get frustrated every day because it's been so beat up and loved to death. And how can I find the way to make a positive impact and kind of try to turn that around? And sometimes it's trying to just educate people enough to have an individual impact on them to think differently or use the resource differently or have a little bit more appreciation or just care about it a little bit more.
But your work is shaping the future generation, right? I take my babies there every single day to a place that you're protecting. So I think you're the answer, right? Like, how do we fight this? I think it's people who are protecting.
We just need more of us.
Yeah. I agree. Let's start a revolution. Ron knows how to do that.
So I want to say, first of all, thank you for all of this and all of your words this afternoon. And kind of to that point of how do we get more people and so on, I think it's really instructive that, Ron, you began and you basically read to us stories. You told us stories. And Karen, when you started speaking, you told us a story. of when you were young and talking to quail, which I love because I talk to the quail in my backyard. And you just mentioned art and how powerful that is, and I think that a mantra that I've come around to believing in is that to reach people is not with data and all of that as the lead. It's you have to come through the heart and then get to the head. And so to that point, and you already talked about the radical reimagining and so on, I'm wondering, can we, using the two of you as a start, and anybody else here as well, to funnel to us, to Shally, to Marisol, I don't know where she's sitting, Marisol, these opportunities where there will be storytelling, where there will be art that will, through its very nature, help to connect us to this world that we sometimes allow us to be disconnected from, like you in one of your readings about, basically being in your living room and you're all comfy and, you're climate controlled and you're all of that, and then it's like, oh, it becomes claustrophobic. At any rate, do you see opportunities and do you know of opportunities coming up that we, through CASCA, can start to share out through our networks, and hopefully it will, go out and get more people to come to these events and to read the books and to embrace the art and deepen the connection.
Yeah, so one of the things, we talked about the Desert Humanities Initiative, and Shally's been working with Jason Bruner. They, as has Erica and a number of other folks, I think they do a lot of really great work, a lot of really just excellent programming. The institute I run, we do a number of different, some programming. One of the things we do at the end, toward the end of the semester in April, is we have something called a non-event, which people sign up for, and it shows up on your calendar, and then the idea is don't do anything. Like you don't, so it's blocking out time on your calendar. The reason I say this is because I think we're all so busy, and we're inundated and bombarded with so much information and demand for our eyeballs, demand for our time, that blocking out some time, curating that time, right? Saying, I'm going to actually block out time. And then, oh, now I have time. What do I actually want to do within that? And we will suggest some kinds of readings about, the problems of time, the problems of busy lives, the problems of, the bombardment through the internet, etc. So I think this question of curating a life, managing our time, so that we do have time to, rather than Netflix, I'm going to do something that feeds me in a different way. Providing, rather than that kind of the fast food habits for our mind, providing something that's more sustainably nourishing. Not always the easiest to engage with, but more sustaining. So, I think I would echo what you're saying there, that that's really good.
That's great. I just love the way that Rob thinks. Working with philosophers and artists is one of the most fun parts of my job. Let's have a non-event. That would never in a million years occur to me, and also I completely love it. It's what makes it so fun. My answer would be, I think CASCA is a great resource. So for the Radically Reimagining Initiative and Earth Day Party, I would say anyone who's here, and it's a manageable group of people, would be invited to come to that. That's environmental thought leaders. We do it on Earth Day. Shally is a great point of contact, if you don't mind being one. I'm a terrible point of contact. Email is not my friend. Whatever. That is true. That is true. The part of my brain that talks to quails is antithetical to the part of the brain that answers email. I'm horrible at email, but man, do I love nature. But Shally is good at both nature and email. So I would say CASCA is an amazing resource. resource, Kim created it, right, from the ground up to bring together people to co-create community. And so connecting with that and issuing an invitation in that way to the Radically Reimagining event seems like a really natural synergy. It happens every year, it's predictable, so in my mind, April 23rd, I'm there, and I feel like that's a good natural synergy. And in terms of connecting, if the Botanical Garden wants to connect on that and potentially host in the future or be a site of co-creation and learning, we would love that. The Botanical Garden actually has the award winner, and I brought this back today for Valerie as thank you. So this is the Radically Reimagining bag from this year. The incredible artist Daniela Napolitano created this as the Radically Reimagining, and this is our statue for the Arizona Sustainability Leadership Award winner, so shall we? So a little keepsake, and also maybe a reminder, right? There's something physical. I'm going to one of our award winners this weekend, and their cactus arm was broken in a tragic incident, and they said we really want it replaced, because we keep it in the lobby. It's like a resort that's dedicated to some green practices and does this really cool farming program. And they say it's a physical reminder, it's a tangible reminder of what we're doing and why we're humanity. So I'm actually, I don't want to say colonizing your desk space or award space or wherever it lives, but let's treat this as a tangible reminder of the idea that maybe we work together and bring together ideas or new opportunities to connect and co-create beyond just this event. Thank you.
Other questions?
Who are some of the funders of the work that you're doing? Who's supporting you all financially?
Okay, well, I can say for the Institute for Humanities Research, that's Arizona State University. What happens is ASU is funded very little by the state, about less than 10% of its operating budget. So a lot of that is students, and the other part is research. So research brings in grant funds, part of which goes to the university. And very small content, it goes to our operations to be able to further research and ideas and creative projects and outreach to communities. And then, of course, the foundation, so gifts and donors are the other element of that. So that's a very sort of direct part of it. As well as we have great people and great staff who give more than their salary. Salary is worth the flavor to that project.
Okay, and the answer for the Radically Reimagining initiative is it's been on a total shoestring. Ron has been incredible with the first year of funding and then also this last year's event through Desert Institutes for Humanity, Institute for Humanity, Jeffrey Cohen, and the College of Humanities has provided some degree of funding. The law school provided in-kind funding and is considering expanding in a more formalized way the initiative, so we hope that happens. But the answer is pretty underfunded at this point and always open to ideas. So if you have any ideas, thoughts, or resources, we would love that. But I would say, like, at this point, I think it's a community of people who are passionate about the ideas and have worked together to use their respective resources and platforms like Liberty Wildlife Refuge or our incredible event planner, Flora Tromlin, to sort of piece together patchwork funding. Do you have ideas?
Maybe.
Fantastic. So let's talk. The other one I should give a plug to. So we have a book project happening, and the Arizona Commission for the Arts is funding some of our individual artists, which is amazing, for the book project. In the book, the idea is to take this energy that's been happening around the initiative and the events and put it in a physical form with potentially University of Arizona Press. They're considering it, but there's a price tag attached with that. To communicate this vision in broader and larger ways. But I think ASU at this point has been pretty incredible about finding ways to make it work.
Any last questions? All right, then. Well, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Ron and Karen, for being